Welcome to And All Shall Be Well. I am your host, Megan Rohrer, and today we have a special guest who actually teaches a graduate level course on wellness. So we are in a special treat to learn about ways that we can connect and disconnect, ways that we can take on new positive things or let go of things that are not really suiting us anymore into the future. My conversation with Dr. Laura is one of my favorites because I find her to be very approachable, very knowledgeable in the work that she does with several degrees and always continuing to learn new things, but also someone who is willing to laugh and understand the sort of simple things in life that maybe speak to humans across the globe. And that is a great segue to thank all of the listeners, particularly those in Japan who have helped our podcast start to be on the podcast ranks in Japan. Thank you to our listeners there and wherever you are listening from. We really appreciate it. This week, I have been shopping because I am starting to prepare for my own family's Thanksgiving meal here in the United States. It is a time of cooking turkeys and being with family and celebrating, and I've really been looking forward to all of the ingredients that go into preparing those meals and foods. But also every year it sort of brings up a conversation in my household, at least, because there's more than one person who likes to cook, of who gets to cook, what we're going to eat, and what recipes from which families we're going to use when we share our time together. And so if you are someone who is wondering which ingredients are the best to move your life forward, particularly in these chaotic times when there's war and some economic uncertainties, and turning on the news feels like a hard thing to do because so often the news is negative, I want you to know that today's conversation, like all of the conversations in this podcast, are designed to lift you up, to support you, and to help you make it through another day, another week, and another moment. Please enjoy this conversation.
Hi, I'm Dr. Laura McGuire. I'm so excited to be here having this conversation today. And I am the founder and CEO of an organization called the National Center for Equity and Agency. I'm also the author of two professionally published books. I'm an adjunct professor at two universities. I like to do a lot of stuff. I'm in seminary right now as well, expanding my work as a sexologist and social scientist into faith spaces. So I'm really excited to be here.
So many beautiful overlapping careers and spaces of life. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the intersections that you embody and how you describe them and how we should talk about them in our conversation together.
Yes. Oh, this was one of my favorite questions in grad school back when I was going it the first time, was really thinking about identity and what are the words we use that capture our experience. So for me, I am non-binary, I'm queer, I'm a Jewish universalist, I'm a scholar, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. So those are kind of the main things that I think tell people a little bit more about the way that I'm interacting with the world.
And if someone's not familiar with it, what is a Jewish universalist?
Good question. So, as a Jewish person, you can be coming into that space, that identity, from many different angles, right? It can be genetic and cultural. It can be something that people opt into religiously and convert to. And for myself, I actually am coming from it in a even more unique way, I guess, because I didn't grow up in Judaism. It's something that I started to explore when looking at ancestor veneration and healing ancestral spiritual trauma, and finding out that my mom's side was B'nai Nosim, which are the people who were forced to convert, particularly in Spain and Portugal, some people in Italy, during the Inquisition. So that's how I came to Judaism. I actually had my uh, ceremony of returning to the faith in Italy last summer. That was really special. And then in that journey, I continue to find my home, the place that embraces all of the mosaic of who I am in the Unitarian Universalist space. So I will be ordained there. And so I kind of blend those being Jewish and also coming from a universal standpoint, meaning I don't think any religion captures the essence of the divine completely. I think there's just so much to learn from all of those different angles. And I really love being in a place where people don't see that as a contradiction, but instead as a depth of exploring what it is to be a theist, a person who believes in God.
Well, that's kind of an amazing journey. When you began exploring your ancestral ties to Judaism and the ancestral trauma that kind of led to the maybe not saying it out loud and and paths into new religious explorations, how were you able to kind of figure out what was the trauma of it and step into what became sacred and filling for you spiritually, right? Because it's a whole mixed bag of all of it, right? It's genocide, it's it's faith that people carried, but then I imagine that there are, depending upon how far you get down the family tree, there might be some people who truly are happy with the religion they converted to, and so it's shame, it's conquest, like, it's all of those things. What were some of the ways you sort of sifted through what was trauma
Mm.
and what was sacred and how you were going to kind of navigate through that?
Mm. Thank you for asking me that. I think that, yeah, no one's ever asked me that before. And I really appreciate that line of thought. I think one of my wishes for the world is that more people did that sifting, right? Because very few people on the earth today do not have a history of colonization in their family, do not have a history of that trauma, particularly around religion being enforced on them. So for myself, I think it really was about first focusing on the negative aspects, like you're talking about the trauma, the genocide, the reality that my ancestors had to make a decision. And this was a decision that allowed me to exist, right? They kept themselves alive under really impossible circumstances. But the price they paid for that was letting go of who they actually were. And so one of the things you do when or at least I did, but other people who are B'nai seem too, you do is you start to look back and find all these pieces to the puzzle, right? Some people first find out through a name. A lot of us are finding out through genetic testing, and then also traditions. So the conversos, as they're also called, these people who kept this outward facade of I belong to the Christian community, but also continue these practices that they would just say, we're family traditions, right? We just do these funny things and don't worry about it. It's just our family's thing. But really, they were relics from the Jewish faith. And so I was able to kind of do all of those pieces and really have to with what they would have gone through, the secrets that had been kept for so long. I think one of the hard things about being on that journey is there's just a lot of stories and questions that you will never know or never have the answer to. My great grandmother, so following directly on the matrilineal line, and my great great grandmother did not go to church, and that was very unusual. That was something that would come up in family stories, that they were just kind of unique in that way, especially for, like, people who were alive in the early 20th century, and yet I want to ask them so badly, but they're not on this earth, what did they know? How much were they aware? Was this just, again, another tradition they don't have context for, or did they have knowledge of their Jewish heritage? Um, and after doing a lot of that and honestly crying a lot, even with other family members, just really sitting with what our ancestors would have gone through and the fact that these traces were maintained for over 500 years, that then it is saying, okay, what do I want to do with this? And like you're saying, for some people, for most people in my family, they have maintained their Christian beliefs. There was discussion back and forth about how they felt about that. And I get it. For a lot of people, it's like, I want to stay with what I know and what I'm comfortable with. That's what feels good to me. And that's, again, awesome. I'm a universalist. That's great. For myself, I knew that this was a wound I wanted to heal, and I had long felt a connection to Judaism, and so it just felt like an alignment. And so I found a rabbi who specialized in this area, studied with her, and then went back to the city state where they lived and did what's called a mikvah immersion. So sometimes that's in a building with natural body of water, but mine was actually in the Mediterranean Sea, near where they lived, and that allowed me to come home to this and then go on the journey of just finding the celebration in that, in knowing that I had kind of closed this loop of something that had been so painful and long forgotten, and moving forward in finding out what does it mean to be a Jewish person, and it has enhanced my life in so many wonderful ways.
Well, my favorite part about this is that it's so beautiful that the space you ended up was a space where you could claim your own identity and let other people claim their own identities. It's very you in all of the spheres of your life, but I also love that it's the opposite of the persecution and genocide that your ancestors faced, right? If you were to emerge out of this journey certain that your rightness could erase other people's ideas, you would be leading back towards the same kind of ideas that injured your own family. And so I love that your ministry pursuits, as you add them to all of the other kind of professional kudos that you have, is leading you to an open space rather than a bitter space or a closed off space. And I think there's something really healing about that as you're moving through your journey. It seems like this openness and desire to help people identify themselves better is a part of all of the careers and all of the professions that you've been trained in. Do you want to speak a little bit about why um, helping people name where they are in this moment or opening them to new possibilities of who they can be and how they can love? Can you talk a little bit about why that's such an important part of your life's work?
I've never thought of that connection before. And so I have to like sit with that myself and be like, yeah, that's a big deal to me. In my work in trauma informed care, a lot of times in helping people to understand and name their experiences, whether they want to denote them as traumatic or not, but just to understand, hey, why did this bother me so much? Why has this stayed with me? Why has this changed the way that I interact with the world moving forward? And then, certainly, as a psychologist, particularly focusing on queer issues and inclusion, helping people to also really find the vocabulary that lights them, that feels like a place they're returning to versus something that maybe was put upon them or just hasn't felt right in its complexity. And sometimes that is moving away from all adjectives or labels or nomers because none of them are a good fit. And spiritually, however people want to describe their experience with the divine or lack thereof, I think they all boil down to coming home to your soul, right? Whatever that looks like and how that evolves. Because I think we also, as humans, really love to feel like, okay, this is the last time I have to figure out who I am, right? We want that to be a journey that ends. And the longer we live, often we find that this is going to be throughout our life, right? There are going to be additional layers that are revealed based on a deeper exploration of who we've always been, but also how experiences come into our life and alter that. So I think you're right. That is a huge part of my ministries overall is giving people language and space to explore how to best describe their lived experience and the way that they want to navigate all kinds of relationships moving forward.
Well, let's imagine for a second that someone's listening to this podcast because they want to figure out how to be well, right? What what advice do you have from them from any of the hats that you have of some things they could try today or this week or in the days to come to work towards their own personal wellness?
Yes. So I was so excited we got to talk about self-care when you sent me the questions ahead because I actually teach a graduate level class at Dominican University just on self-care. And people might be thinking, wait a minute, you can teach a 3 credit course just on self-care and nothing else? Yes, you can, because I think a lot of times our perception of that term or concept is very, very limited, right? We think, oh, it means making sure that I eat mindfully and take my time, or taking a trip to the beach, or I'm going to have a long bubble bath tonight, right? That's self care. How could you go on and on about that for multiple weeks? And the reality is that teaching it is really about helping to clarify some of those misconceptions and also unlearning what self care is and relearning what its limitations are. So, one of the things that I'll often help people to think about is the math of self care. And I hate math. So, don't worry, you don't have to pull up the big numbers. But it really is thinking differently than just adding to your life all of these different things that keep you going, and instead starting with subtracting. Because so often people say, okay, I have all these commitments, all of these roles, all of these expectations from other people and from myself. And therefore, I just have to add some more stuff to that. And then I'll feel great, right? And what they find is they cannot maintain that. There's just not enough spoons, there's not enough hours in the day. And then they say, well, self care doesn't work. So I'll say, let's start by subtracting. What are some things you can start saying no to? What are some boundaries you can start setting differently? And that includes with yourself, saying to yourself, I don't have to maybe do this and that. I can get support and help with it. So first we subtract. Then we look at the things that we really love and want to maintain and the things that we have to do. And we find those pieces of time or spaces in our energy where we can bring something in that is restorative, whether that's time to read, going outside, feeling the fresh air, etc. The other thing I really like to clarify with self care is that all of those things are akin to an oil change or a tire rotation. Self care is maintenance. It is not going to address the systemic issues that are causing damage to you, the vehicle, right? So I do self care so that I can get up each day and feel like I'm the best version I can be of myself in that moment. But just like if you did that tire rotation, but then you drove your car down a road full of potholes and broken glass, or somebody came up to your car, was just hitting it with a bat, right? Changing the tires or rotating the tires or changing the oil is not going to address those other things. And that's one of the things we have to explain is that the ultimate issues that are at play that deplete people so much and cause burnout and cause toxic stress are things we have to address communally. An individual cannot get to the root causes of those. So there are the pieces we can control and we can opt out of, and we can start adding in things that are better for us. But then there's also addressing that, again, we are living in a culture that is structurally unequal, that we are dealing with all different kinds of prejudice and capitalism and all of these things, right? And that's real too. And we don't have to have on ourselves this expectation that we're going to be able to fix all of that. We start with the piece that we can address, and then we fight collectively for the larger paradigm shifts.
Well, and that's really important too, because there's almost this poisonous idea for people on the margins that if you can just get enough self-care, you can be fine with whatever bananas stuff is happening. And you hear that a lot in toxic workplaces, where people are like, yeah, but if you just like took care of yourself, or if we just give you 3 more wellness days, maybe it'd be fine and you could make it through this. And I guess that's the really hard part, is that we're all sort of making choices. Some of us have the ability to get in or get out of some of these weird and hard systems i- based on our privilege, right? Some of us might need to be in a two-parent home but not have it be the healthiest situation. Some of us might need to be in a work situation that pays the bills, even if it's not the healthiest situation. And for some people, just the act of turning the TV on and wanting to watch the news so you know what the weather is, so you can know if you should wear a raincoat. It is one of those kind of depleting spaces that seems to always be bad news everywhere. It's such weird, chaotic times. Do you have any ideas, like, for people who feel like the world is sort of a fire hose of taking away our marbles? Um, like, is there anything we can do to sort of like stuff a rag in the hole to like just sort of like block out some of the chaos? Like, what do we do if we're in a situation where we're not immediately going to be able to change our dynamic, but we just need a break, a pause?
Yeah.
Um, do you have any ideas for ways that people do that? I'm asking for a friend.
Yes. I think that just talking about the information piece in and of itself, right? We have this collective trauma of watching on social media, on the news, in our communities, people suffering all around us that echoes then in our own experience, that linked fate, right? What's happening to other people is linked to what can happen to me or what has previously happened to me. And so we are constantly reliving that. And I think one of the things we can do is think of information as something that we are stewards of, right? We don't need to grab it all at once and endlessly be digesting it because we just literally can't, right? Our brains and our bodies were not built for this level of information. Instead, we can say, I want to set aside intentional time where I'm not just passively consuming things, causing that stress, causing that secondary trauma to myself, but instead know that I have the energy to engage with this mindfully, to look for my part in finding solutions to it, just lifting these situations up in prayer, whatever it is, right? Not doom scrolling, but intentionally stewarding our ingestion of information. And I think sometimes there's so much pressure to know all things, to be all things, to say all things. And going back to that math piece, part of that is really subtracting by saying no, by saying, this does not feel right now. I do not have the energy to engage in this in the way that I think is most intentional and respectful to the situation. Sometimes it's taking a step back from a lot of things at large. And I think as far as where sometimes we are caught up in these cycles within the systems we have to interact with, where we think this is the only option, right? You talked about workplaces that have maybe a less than healthy culture, and we might think, "But I have to have a job like this. I have to have a 9 to 5, right? If I'm in ministry, it has to be within a synagogue or parish, etcetera." And stepping back, having that stewardship of our time and saying, "Wait, let me really sit in this. How much of this is what's been projected as a mandatory part of life in my existence? And where do I actually have a lot of choice?" That's one of the reasons I'm so passionate, whether it's entrepreneurial ministry or any other kind of entrepreneurship, really allowing people to think creatively in what their work looks like, because it does then allow for a lot of flexibility and malleability around what our needs are, and more permission to set the boundaries that need to be set so we have sustainable careers and lives.
Well, how do you do this in your own life? Of the wellness bits that you take on that you're willing to share with other people in a public forum, what are some of the ways that are your favorite kind of wellness activities these days?
Huh, favorite wellness activities would definitely be, movement. I think that's something just this past year I've started to prioritize more. It was always something I would kind of put to the side, and, age was catching up with me, and I've started feeling a lot of really disruptive aches and pains more than previously. And the more I got out and got fresh air, that sunshine, and moved with intention, the better I felt. So I said, okay, this has to go on the calendar as a priority. Another thing that I do is I'm really protective of my calendar. So my days off are my days off. I have a scheduling app that I direct people to, and it is limited. You cannot schedule a meeting with me anytime, day or night, every day of the week, right? I have very specific hours that are, I think for a lot of people, they would see them as very limited, but that's intentional, right? I won't have the spoons to do the other things that I need to do unless I limit the things that are going to be requiring more of my focus and time and effort. So, thinking that way requires that internal work though, shifting the priorities that we've been told we have to have, or the time we have to allot to our profession, and saying, that's just made up. This just was made up in the ether by capitalism. And I can choose to opt out of that. I can choose to make my time look differently. So that has become really big, and then I get to add in the things that also fill me up, like really wonderful time with my children, with my family, um, just having enjoyment in life, spending the mornings. I think that's another big thing I do, spending my mornings kind of trying to enter slowly into the day. And then for myself, as someone who identifies also as a spoonie, I know that my spoons get super low in the afternoon. So doing things around the house and that intentional movement and just quiet time then allows me to have more energy in the evening when my kids are out of school. So saying no to things, time blocking, keeping my calendar sacred. I read a quote a few years ago that really hit home, that said, "Are you worshiping at the idol of your to-do list?" And I think I'm a very type A person. I am very proud of all I achieve, but sometimes I have done that. And so I've had to reframe what priorities need to look like, so that when I'm in the spaces where it really requires a lot of focus, I'm able to have that. It's readily available.
And in case there's someone who doesn't know that they have spoons,
Mhm.
spoons is not just like emotional capacity, but it's like the ability to hold something else, right?
Yeah.
Is there more to spoons?
Yeah, I mean, spoon theory is so wonderful. It came out of the disability rights movement, but I think for many people, they might not necessarily think of themselves as dealing with a disability. think there's a lot because of ableism, there's a lot of shame around that concept. But so many people are feeling that, and do have disabilities that they're dealing with, or just are a human navigating life and don't think about, yes, their energy currency, how much they can actually take in effectively. And when we learn about theories like that, it gives us that permission to say, yeah, I can say I don't have the energy, or I don't have the spoons for this, both physically and mentally and spiritually. And that allows us to then show up fully when we do have that that fullness, that ability to give to ourselves and others. But it's not an endless resource, our time, our energy. So stewarding that and honoring those limitations, I think, is one of the most radical things we can do.
Well, I wish you all the spoons. I wish you the number of spoons as like at an ice cream tasting place that doesn't have like a sign up. Not the one with the sign that says you can only taste two things, but the
I'd
amount of
never say
spoons.
that.
Oh yeah. No, the amount of
That'd be
spoons at
great.
like a countryside farm that wants to sell you all the ice cream desserts. They got all the spoons for you, and then you're gonna yeah. So that's what I wish for you. That's what I wish for everyone who's listening is that sort of delight of getting to taste something, decide if you like it or not, but not have to eat all of it, right? And
Mm,
have a new spoon to try the next thing and see what's gonna come next, right?
yeah, I love that.
Well, if people want to connect with you and learn more about how to get engaged with your podcasts and with your books and with all of the things that you have in the world, what's the best ways for them to be able to do that?
Yeah. So you can connect with me at my website, drlauramcguire.com. I know my handle for Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook is in the video right now. It's at Dr. Laura McGuire, LauramCguire. You can find my podcasts, which are Asking for a Friend through Spectrum South, which is a fabulous magazine about queer sexuality, and Reverend Rohrer was on there. And then my new podcast is Religiosa TTEA, and that is going to be exploring trauma informed faith, interfaith topics, a lot of fun stuff. So check out all the info on that website and on my social media. And I love hearing from people. So feel free to reach out and let me know what connected with you, and how I can support people in any way.
Well, thank you for joining us and for all the work that you're doing in the world and are studying to do in the world in the future. We really need more folk like you out there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to And All Shall Be Well this week. I found it particularly encouraging and exciting that Dr. Laura was able to explore her genealogy in such remarkable ways and that she is so committed to the work of being able to encourage and support others. I hope if you have any extra spoons, you'll support and encourage those around you. If you don't have enough spoons, it's enough to just look in the mirror at least once today and say, hey, I love you. And if you can't manage it in your own mirror, just know that I mean it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe and do all of the things that people do in order to support programs like this so that we can continue on. And if you're able, click the link below for Patreon and become a supporter. I appreciate you no matter what, knowing that if you take all of the advice in today's conversation, all shall be well. If you don't, all shall be well too. No matter how you make it through, I'm so glad that you do. I'll now talk to you next time. Take care, everybody.